Do video games make you violent? Well, the short answer is no. The long answer is, in a way, sort of. Violence in video games and its association with violent behavior is a complicated and extremely controversial topic. Today, we're going to explore the controversy over video games, its relationship with violent behavior, and how it all began. Video games have now become an integral part of daily life for tens of millions of people around the world. Naturally, when a sector becomes so large and popular, it invites a lot of criticism. And one of the largest criticisms of video games is, of course, violence. Specifically, violence in video games crossing over into violent behavior in reality. Violence in video games has had a long history, and it's invited controversy since the beginning, with beat-em-up arcade games like Mortal Kombat in the news, and early shooting games like Doom. However, the newest wave of criticism for video game violence has its origins in a very unfortunate event. April 20th, 1999, the Columbine High School Massacre. This was an event that shocked the entirety of the United States and the world, and it sparked an incredibly heated debate over many controversial topics, ranging from gun control laws to high school bullying and, of course, violence in video games.
Violent video games have encouraged the killing of innocent people for sport.
The two students who committed the massacre were known to have been fans of popular video games at the time, such as Doom, Wolfenstein 3D, Duke Nukem, and Quake. After the event, a number of parents filed several unsuccessful lawsuits against video game manufacturers, and from there the debate became mainstream in the public eye. From there, the controversies only grew, many of them shocking and were covered extensively over news networks, as it remained a hot-button topic that could bring a lot of attention. Many grieving families, politicians, and media figures found video games an easy target to blame.
Through vicious, violent video games.
And it's pretty easy to see why. Many modern video games are filled with violent imagery, actions, and other horrifying scenarios. With such a ripe topic, there have been numerous scientific studies done over the last few decades by many reputable institutes, and the overwhelming number of these results have shown no clear link between violent video games and violent behavior. There is, however, a link between video games and aggression, specifically competitive video games. To anyone who's played video games competitively online, this is not news to them. On many online gaming lobbies, you will hear some incredible language and behavior you would not see normally. Some of them are comedic and incredibly entertaining, while others have sparked terrible tragedy.
Yeah, it set off a chain of events that ended in the death of a man in Kansas.
This has become symptomatic to the culture of video games in general, and is a point many people will argue against video games for. However, this sort of aggressive behavior can be seen in any sort of competitive activity. One of the best examples of which is, of course, competitive sports. There is an extremely long history of violence in sports, whether it's between competing athletes or merely upset fans. Typically, the more common places you see aggression in sports with is the more contact-oriented competitive sports, like ice hockey or American football. This kind of heightened aggression is not merely seen in players involved, but also in the fans watching. A good example of this is, of course, the famous 2011 Vancouver Stanley Cup riot when the Vancouver Canucks hockey team lost to the Boston Bruins. The riot was sparked by fan rivalry and saw at least 140 people injured during the incident, and 101 people were arrested that night. While competitive video games and aggression do have a link, so do any other forms of competitive activities, especially ones that involve physical contact. However, what about the incredibly violent imagery that's seen in video games? Doesn't that have any effect on people? Constant exposure to violent imagery certainly has an effect of desensitizing people. But video games are hardly the only, or even a particularly large source of this. There are currently many movies, TV shows, comics, and a lot of other media sources that are absolutely loaded with violent imagery. They exist in numbers that far outmatch any impact that video games can have, and have more than their fair share of controversy as well. There's a lot of difficulty in discussing the impact of violent media, especially due to there being so much social and political controversy over the topic. There's also a serious lack of consensus about the different definitions and various measures of aggression in the first place, and many of the studies involved have either not run on long enough or have been large enough to provide any clear conclusions. Further, a lot of these arguments about violent video games often discount the fact that video games with violent imagery are realistically a very small portion of the market. There exists many extremely popular video games which are not filled with violent imagery, such as Minecraft, which has sold more than 122 million copies worldwide, or the ever-popular Mario series made by Nintendo, which are some of the most recognized and beloved video games the world round. And of course, all of this does not address the elephant in the room: mobile gaming. Mobile gaming in 2017 consisted of an estimated 42% of the global market. Mobile gaming overwhelmingly lends itself to casual players of all ages and genders, and it tends to feature titles such as Angry Birds, Candy Crush, and Clash of Clans, which do not incorporate violent imagery as a core mechanic. Mobile gaming is now expected to overtake every other sector of the video game market relatively quickly. Video games have progressed a very long way from the early days of Pong to the multi-million-dollar AAA titles of today. However, it's only been over the last decade where the video game industry has seen such incredible growth, going from having a small niche audience to being a juggernaut of the entertainment industry and a genuine part of mainstream media. In 2017 alone, the global video game industry grew to over $116 billion in revenue. Video games have been growing in almost every way, not just in traditional console platforms, but now through new online distribution methods like Steam, the growing popularity of esports, and with mobile gaming taking an increasingly large share of the market. In the end, each time there's some kind of tragedy such as the Columbine shooting, people will still look for an easy target to blame, and the controversy over video games causing violence is likely to continue. While there is some link between violence in media and violent behavior, the science remains incredibly murky, and it's important to remember that correlation does not equal causation. As video games become a larger part of mainstream media, mobile gaming will continue to grow, and violent video games will continue to decline as a share of the market. And as the importance of technology in our lives grows and the technology we use advances, the debate over violent video games is likely to continue. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to our channel to see more like it.